It's like, I keep looking at this deer and so number one, he's in velvet, right? Full velvet, which I've never killed a deer in full velvet. So it's like, well, that's going to probably put him over the edge for me.
Not alone.
Yeah, it's like, is that a piece of velvet? Yeah, he's dead. Yeah, welcome to the first Hunter podcast. It's something that I think that Jared and myself have wanted to do for quite some time. And, what better way to pass some time during the afternoon than talk about our passions of hunting and whitetail deer management and, really why hunter as a whole is a passion project for us, and something that I think that there are more people out there that share and feel the same way we do. It's just maybe we're scattered amongst, multiple brands or forums or internet websites. And I think that, our goal for Hunter, not only this podcast, but as a brand, has been to share that passion and, hopefully draw other people out of the woodwork that have the same passions that we share.
Yeah, I second that. Sounds exactly right. I mean, it's cool to be able to have a podcast or some kind of an outlet where we can, I think it's a better outlet than a structured show or even like a YouTube series where we can just kind of talk about our thought process, because I think that's one of the backbones of Hunter, and the reason that we did it is that there's so much that happens behind the scenes that goes into drawing tags, figuring out where to hunt, checking out the resources and getting the equipment that's needed to do these types of things. And a lot of it we're figuring out for the first time as well. It's not like we're spending 90 days in the Yukon every year. Like we're East Coast whitetail guys and dipping our toes into more of the Midwest and some Western hunts. We did our first mule deer hunt this year. And so the goal, I think, with the podcast is to kind of bring you along on our thought process of how we go about figuring out or what the inception of some of these hunts are, through to completion, and then recap. And we're going to be learning from successes and failures on those hunts and the strategies that went behind them. And
and I hope we bring some of the conversation out of the listeners and of the followers of the brand as well, because I mean we're all kind of in this same boat where we share this crazy passion for whitetail deer hunting. I think, speaking for both of us, we love the management and the off-season aspect almost as much as the hunting aspect. But we're also not booking outfitters. We're not paying for weeks at a time to be out on a hunt. We're not on the road for 60 to 90 days a year. We're having to balance life with this passion, but it comes with, some big rewards. The fact that, this year we'll probably step foot on, 7 or 8 new properties that we have access to and have leased. That we're going to be able to perform management on. We're going to start scouting from scratch. In fact, we'll have cameras out here soon and can kind of learn the property and use our skills and knowledge that we've been successful with on other properties to try to be successful on those pieces. But a lot of them are in new territory that we haven't hunted or haven't hunted a lot. So I think what will be cool is how can we engage, everybody that's like-minded in this hunter belief of, as soon as the season ends, like for many seasons they're ending this Saturday, it's a fresh, clean slate, right? We reset the button to go back and say, all right, now who made it through? What are those strategies? Do I need to do, selective cutting to try to thicken things up and add more browse? Like, where are my food plots going? Do I need to clean stuff out? And so I think that what our goal is with this brand and with this podcast is to generate those discussions. And I think along the way, the hope is to bring in a bunch of guests that, we don't know everything, right? Everybody has their own advantages and their own experience in certain categories. So we're going to bring guests in about products. We're going to bring guests in about certain types of hunting. We're going to bring guests in who are like us and maybe have hunted with us, but they've had different experiences than we've had. We'll talk about predator trapping and how that's important to management. We'll talk about pressure and, how to balance that belief between family and friends on a piece of ground where the number one big buck killer for anybody is pressure. And that's something I know you've dealt with on your place in Ohio. So I think that ultimately, if we can come out and discuss valid points that I know that other hunters are experiencing out there, and it's a strength in numbers type of thing, everybody's going to learn a lot about it, and I think we're going to have some really cool discussions throughout the year.
Yeah, you nailed on a lot of good stuff there. And I hope that there are people like us. We kind of assume that there are, and, we work in this industry, so it's kind of our job to know that. But our hope is that as we talk about a bunch of these different topics that are close to our hearts, I think, some people will kind of speak up and say, hey, I've experienced this as well, or this is something we struggle with, and, that should give us some good discussion to cover and ultimately grow from.
So I think like a good part for us here is kind of like I said, we're here at the end of the season, right? I mean, it's now 2021, but for all intents and purposes, the season, the deer hunting season for most of the states that we hunt is winding down or is out. It really comes back to what lessons did we learn on these properties? I know you and I, especially before we even talk about any of the new properties that we're going to be on this year. We hunted hard on some of the properties that we've hunted for many years in the past and have had success with, and we know there's big bucks. And at this part of the season, it's almost disheartening, right? Like we literally were just discussing how, I have not seen forms of life on the property that I hunt here in Pennsylvania, and especially haven't seen a buck in, 4 weeks probably since rifle season really ended.
Yeah.
And now the hard part is there were some good bucks I hunted there this year. Didn't really get on. There were some great up and coming bucks that unfortunately, and life has it, got shot. So it's like it's so hard not to get down. Essentially right out of the gate. I mean, we're starting 2021 season now, but it's so hard not to get down to think like, do I even have a deer to hunt this upcoming year on these places?
Yeah, no doubt. And that's a big thing that I've dealt with, especially over the past year, but from season to season, and probably one that a lot of people share, is just being disheartened by the deer that aren't there.
Yeah.
I think the reality that people have to face is that it takes 5 years to grow a 5-year-old whitetail, and with the pressure in a lot of these states. I mean, Jeremy and I are coming from southwestern Pennsylvania, where there's probably more hunters per capita than almost anywhere, and figuring out how to either adjust your goals or adjust your strategy or find new resources to expand your reach to achieve that goal of hunting big bucks. And that's something that we've done a lot of this year with looking at some of these new leases.
Well, and the hard part with that is, when we're hunting close to home, we have more time, more availability, more investment in those properties. So in theory, our odds of killing a deer should be better. Sometimes that's not the case. So it's a risk when you start to branch out to states like Kentucky or Illinois, Indiana, Kansas. But at the same time, the reward that it seems or appears to be there is that there are big bucks. I mean, you can't kill a big buck if he's not on the property, to begin with. So I think what will be interesting as we get into this year for us, and even in the next couple months of scouting, is do we start to locate big bucks on some of these new properties? And keep in mind, guys, for us, like a big buck is a mature deer. Like, yeah, I'd love to kill a 150-inch deer all day long, but I mean, if I can kill a mature 5 or 6-year-old whitetail, I don't care if he's a 140-inch 8-point, like that's an awesome buck for us. We're not here to say, hey, listen, we're only out for 200 inchers, right? It'd be cool. Like, don't get me wrong, like anytime that you and I have an opportunity to get on or know that there's a Boone and Crockett deer in a area, that's exciting. Because at any point, there is a chance.
Or in some cases, just a mature animal.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's, we're not at that point where it's like we can pick and choose from booners and,
No.
just bounce back and forth. It's like, man, we're just trying to find a mature deer to hunt on our home farm, or
right.
if he's not there, maybe in a neighboring state, and then make moves to get those deer killed. And hopefully, as this podcast evolves and as we evolve into some of these properties and we start killing some of these deer, our goals and our expectations will adjust. I don't know what the end goal for that is, but I mean, that's the journey.
Well, and I think that, we've got a few different strategies in play. If we look at what we've hunted here in Pennsylvania and Ohio, we've hunted a single property, a large property at that, But ultimately, you're committed to that property.
You're talking about my family farm.
Your
in
family
Ohio?
farm in Ohio, the farm that I hunt here in the mountain in Pennsylvania. They're larger properties. It's a single property, and you're committed to it, right?
Let's talk about that really quickly. Why don't you just talk about like your core hunting farm, and I'll talk about mine.
Yeah, I mean, so my core hunting area is 1,000 acres here on quote unquote the mountain of southwestern Pennsylvania. There's no ag land anywhere around it. It's old reclaimed strip mine ground.
Big timber, almost all
big timber, old timber. In a lot of cases, the classic fern bottom type forest floor. We have a fair amount of food plots on them. Transparently, we probably have too many deer on the property in general because those food plots get hammered every year, year in, year out. But in a fortunate standpoint, we have at least one deer that is substantially over 150 every year. And for, our area, Pennsylvania in general, to have that, is a rarity. In fact, we won't be able to see it, but the buck over Jared's shoulder is a buck that I killed on that mountain that scored 162 inches, and that is a deer of a lifetime anywhere, let alone in the state. And this year, I was hunting on a deer that arguably was probably 165 to 170, and very visible. Like that's one thing that I can say. But because of how that property hunts, it's really difficult. There's a lot of clear cut areas, because it's old strip mine. And it's in that big timber. I mean, those deer just roam. And so, that's my core ground. It has been. I've killed a lot of deer up there. I've killed good deer up there. And one thing to note, Jared and I, not that we knock gun hunting, and we will definitely do it and probably be doing it through this year. We're primarily bow hunters here, right? I mean, that's our core passion is from opening a bow through that rut season and then even in the late. But yeah, I mean, that's my kind of core ground here, which is a lot different than what you've got in a family farm in Ohio, which is, an ag-based property.
Yeah, and we share a lot of the same probably struggles, the main one being pressure from people that hunt with us on those farms.
For sure.
Not necessarily because, I think in both cases it's because we've got permission on these. Mine is from my parents. Yours is from, a landowner that you have a personal friendship with.
Right.
And both of them want other people to hunt.
It's the camaraderie aspect. I mean, hunting as a whole, it's a weird thing because I feel very at ease when I'm by myself in a tree stand, and I can control my movement, my sound, how I got in and out of that stand. And that's been different for me this year, especially with taking the boys out hunting. But hunting as a whole is a camaraderie-based aspect. Like, I'll be the first to say, and this just from personal experience, like, the moment I shoot a big buck, like, I'm calling you or my dad or Emily or, there's an instant, like, I want to celebrate and enjoy this with other people that understand what I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah.
But there's a fine line to that because, I mean, as much as you want to be with people and doing that, the more pressure you put on these properties, no matter how big or small they are, the more you're hurting your chances at killing a mature buck. Now, it's not, some guys just want to kill a buck, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to kill a mature whitetail, they sense that pressure, and it becomes increasingly difficult to see that deer, especially during daylight hours.
Yeah, for sure. I get maybe before we get too far into that conversation, because it's one that I've had probably for hours and hours, if not weeks at this point.
Yeah.
I'll talk a little bit about my farm. So I hunt in eastern central Ohio between Columbiana and Carroll County. And it's a farm that's owned by my parents, and it's primarily old pasture ground. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was actually one of the few founding members of Certified Angus Beef Association, which is a cool connection to the beef industry.
Yep.
And he's since passed on, but the farm that we hunt now is a piece of what was once, a big part of that original organization. And as cool as that is, that means nothing for deer hunting other than there's lots of cows and reclamation of those pastures, to get it to a good hunting property and what we're looking to do. And so my parents bought that from, my mom's parents probably 8 or 9 years ago at this point, something like that.
That sounds right.
Ever since then, we've been consistently trying to improve the property, primarily through tree plantings we've done, food plots on an annual basis. I've done a lot of chainsaw work. I've probably done TSI on, I would say upwards of 300 to 400 acres of timber on that property.
You've got a lot of ag on there now that was once just pasture.
That's right. Yeah, we've brought in and started a contract with a farmer to bring some ag crops onto the farm, and it's definitely improved, but at the same time it's been offset by, I think, pressure that's being increased from year to year. And so while the property is getting better and better, the pressure is also becoming more and more. And something that you said earlier that I think is all too true is that it doesn't really matter how good the property is. If there's not a buck on it that's worth hunting,
you're out.
It doesn't matter how good the property is.
Well, and that's what I'm kind of excited about this year, and we haven't had it in years past, but we've got two pieces specifically in Illinois that we'll be hunting this year.
Which is a first for us. I hunted Illinois one time with a friend.
Yeah, I've never hunted
when
Illinois.
I was like 16, and it was a bust. I let all the farmers' cows out, and he kicked me off. So,
speaking of cows, there they go.
So that was my learning experience, and so hopefully our next trip to Illinois is different.
Well, and I've never hunted in Illinois. Never had an Illinois license. I mean, obviously, you think big whitetails, Illinois is one of the first things that come to mind. What I think I'm excited about most is that we're hunting smaller tracts. I think both of them are around 80 acres that have some significant public around them. And that's one thing I think it's a whole separate podcast. But, we hunt Kansas a lot, right? And one of the beautiful things about Kansas for us, first of all, is per pressure.
And a lot, just for perspective, is usually 1 week out of the year.
Yeah. Multiple years, one week a year. Yeah. So there's our relevancy.
And we try to make it out to shed hunt whenever we can. And if we can get out in September and hang and move some stands around, we'll do that too.
And so if you think about Kansas, we've got a little over 400 acres leased now on a couple different tracts, but everything is connected by Army Corps of Engineer land, right? It's public land in between. And so where we used to be very private land, lease-based oriented when we went out there, now we've slowly started to expand ourselves into these public lands, which has now given us thousands of acres to hunt. The struggle is, and this is what I'm excited about for Illinois, is that I could be in one area on a lease, you could be in another area on public. We almost are still essentially hunting the same damn deer. Right? I mean, those deer are moving so much that even though we've got so much land in between us, we are still hunting the same deer. Meaning, if those deer aren't moving in that area at that given time, they aren't moving for anybody. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm excited about on Illinois is that we've now got 2 leases, 80 acres, bordering public ground, that we have.
Is it the Shawnee National Forest?
Shawnee National Forest on the one side, and I can't remember the other one. It's one of the canals in the wetlands areas,
which is pretty unique. I mean, we've done a little bit of research, and it looks like a lot of flooded timber. We've not actually seen these properties in person yet. Yeah, we're looking for swamp donks, and it does look like some awesome terrain on both of those pieces. A couple pinch points on them. Really nice spot for a big food plot.
And close to each other, right? I mean, 30 minutes apart, basically. But literally, we will now be hunting 2 separate, areas, 2 separate herds of deer, which makes it nice because, we've been very defeated in the past. Kansas is a great example this year. I was fortunate first morning to harvest an awesome buck on public land in between our 2 leases. Weather hit, and literally you and Pat spent a lot of time, my dad and I spent a lot of time, and we didn't see shit.
Yeah.
There was nothing moving.
I know I kind of was up and down on it that week. Like, I was in the spot. Correct. You could go to this spot. I still firmly believe, and this is a spot on public land that we just identified with a map. Mm-hmm. We had some friends of ours actually send us a kayak, and we used that to get about a mile down in. Pat and I went down in with camera gear, 2 stands, bows, the works, and we're way down at the far end of this piece of public, and it's X marked the spot. And we sat that for a week straight, and barely saw one buck that I would have considered shooting.
And you talk about mentally beating.
Yeah, it was tough.
Like, people don't understand that. Like, it's like, oh, well, you're lucky you got to hunt Kansas. And it's like, listen, day in, day out, knowing you're in the right spot but not seeing anything. I mean, it is a mental escapade, basically. It just takes its toll on you. And it's such a flip because if you rewind to 2019, sitting in that same spot for what? 3 days, maybe 2 days. I mean, you were just towards the end of the hunt when you started to hunt that. I mean, you were in the big ones every day,
right out of the gate. Like, when I found this spot, I could see it from the top of a hillside, and then I retreated and was studying some maps because I knew that it looked good. And when we decided on that spot, I found a kayak locally. We had a friend of ours, Kev, hook us up with a kayak.
We had a lot of Flex Seal.
A little Flex Seal, yeah, and we got down into it, hung the stand. I was by myself at the time. We weren't hunting. Hunter wasn't even on the radar. We weren't doing any filming. I was just trying to, kill these deer that were down in there. And so I got down, I hung the stand, and right away I was in the bucks. And it was either the second or third day that I was hunting that spot at 1:00 in the afternoon. The biggest buck in that bottom that we had pictures of, a buck I call Pretty Boy, waltzed right in again at 1:00 in the afternoon. I was on the phone with Margie, my wife. I said, I gotta go. I threw the phone down real quick. He came into 20 yards, and I didn't have the distance nailed down. I've got a single pin adjuster, and I skipped one right off of his back. Yeah. And actually, that buck came back later that night, and I watched him breeding does all up in the CRP. So I have that in the back of my mind now when I'm hunting that stand to I can't get out of this thing. A buck is going to come in here at 1:00 p.m. at 20 yards, and I have to be here when that happens.
And that's your managing expectations, too. So your expectations from 19 are through the roof, and that's even harder for this year because now each day, and I could tell with you, when we would come back and we'd have these discussions, at one point in time you did pull an audible and you got out of there.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, Pretty Boy showed up that night, and the next morning you were committed.
Not in daylight.
But you're committed. So it's
and that was the first picture we had gotten of him last year. I didn't even know what he looked like.
I just assumed he had made it.
I just assumed he had made it, and I assumed he was in the same spot. And the first night that we pulled out, luckily it was after dark. He showed up and confirmed that he's still there. He's still a beast.
And what a contrast, though, dude, because think of that. We literally have not scouted. We didn't get to shed hunt because of coronavirus. We haven't been there at all. No pictures. And because it's Kansas and the way that pressure is there, we're just that deer made it. Talking about 160-inch buck, just made it. Meanwhile, I don't even know if most of my 2-year-olds made it here.
Yeah, I think that's one of the coolest things about the Midwest, or anytime you can get into somewhere that has bigger tracts of land. Ultimately, that's going to equal less pressure, and the deer are more likely to get old. And really, that's what it takes. There's good genetics almost everywhere, in my opinion. There's bad genetics too, but there's potential for good deer almost anywhere. And if they have the food to supplement that, but most importantly, the age. If they can make it to 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, this deer sitting here on the shed or on the table is a 10-year-old deer that you shot at that place in Kansas that ultimately slipped through us.
He shed. Yeah, and that's the thing is and that's probably the biggest set of antlers that deer had, at least with us knowing him.
And his entire life.
Yeah, and so it is amazing to think about how that works. But I like the point of there's good genetics everywhere. That's a big topic in any deer manager's head. Is I just don't have the genetics, and it is true to a point for some things. I'll take. I've got 75 acres in Menifee County, Kentucky. It's rugged, it's mountainous, it's big timber. We've got Daniel Boone National Forest all around us. There's no ag. And, this year especially, I would say 90% of the bucks that I saw were 9 points or greater. Whereas on average, every buck is going to likely be an 8-point at maturity. That is the top of the bell curve. It's an 8-point. And you've got some that are maturity are less than that, some that are maturity more than that. But when you pick up those patterns and you see those opportunities, in fact, my neighbor, though I didn't see the deer, shot a piebald 12-point or hit a piebald 12-point. Now you're starting to think this area truly does have, not what I would say is a genetic advantage, but has superior genetics in that 10 points are likely going to score better than 8 points. Whereas I've been in other places, especially when I lived in Mississippi, I would see 5-point mature deer walking around. Giant 5 points, but it was trash. And so I think that's where the expectation comes in because for us, everybody wants to kill a big buck, but what is a big buck to you? I think for both of us, we would love to kill a booner. No doubt. Who wouldn't, right? Anybody that says that they don't care is lying to themselves, lying to whoever they're talking to. But I think ultimately, for me, it's that challenge to a mature deer. And this isn't to be cocky, but if I wanted to go out and go to all the states that I had tags in this year and kill 3-year-old bucks, I would have did it, right? That doesn't excite me. I'm not saying that it shouldn't excite everybody, but to just go out and kill a bunch of 3-year-old bucks doesn't excite me. To go out there and spend 7 days and try to kill a mature buck and not is disappointing, but I take more pride, and I guess I get more reward out of that hunt and knowing I gave it my all to kill a buck that has lived for 5+ years and is smart as hell than to go out and shoot the first 2 or 3 year old buck that I see.
Yeah. It's a touchy subject, man. It's a lot of people feel a lot of different ways about hunting, and I may disagree, but I'm not the authority on that. It seems to be whenever there's a shared resource and there's a differentiation in opinion,
Yeah.
that's when you have gun hunters conflicting with bow hunters and trophy hunters conflicting with meat hunters, and everybody has a point, and the fact is we're
Yeah.
all sharing a resource, and so that's the point that eventually we'll circle back to, I assume, is that there's other people hunting the same pieces of property that we are that have different goals.
Oh, 100%.
And as much as we enjoy hunting with them, as good of friends as they are, there's inevitably going to be some form of conflict in that your goals oppose each other.
Right, and I mean, listen, at the end
I do want to say this really quickly, too, is that there, I think, is a misperception by some people about thinking that a deer won't ever be something. And I think that, because their antlers are not impressive 1 year or they're not sure how old they are, the buck you sent us last night is a perfect example of that. There's a deer down at the same spot that we call the Ants where I missed Pretty Boy that 2 years ago I was guessing was a 3-year-old buck, and he had an awesome frame. I mean, he was cool and wide, but
It's a big 7.
He was like a big 6 or a big 7 point, like not an impressive scoring deer.
Nice frame, he was thin.
Yeah, we didn't have any pictures of that deer until after we were done hunting this year. We already back, but we try to leave these cameras running. And that deer this year, we're now getting pictures of him in roughly the same area. I bet that deer scores in the mid 160s right now.
Yeah, as a mainframe 9 point.
He's a giant. He blew
And I'm
up.
talking with having like 2-inch brow tines at that.
Was that last? It was just last year, not 2 years ago. So he was 3 last year, 4 this year. And that deer, now that I see him, I feel has the potential to blow up and will certainly be 175 plus next year.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a monster frame. He's not heavy. He probably will never be that, like, just heavy. Like, this deer has just insane mass. But he's got such
the
a
frame, and he's got that
He's
time.
got 12 plus inch G2s and 3s. And it's one of those deer that we joked about because it was like, man, like, that's such a cool deer. And when you see him, when you saw him in the woods in 2019, like,
I saw him like 5 or 6 times.
He looks impressive coming in.
Yeah.
And then, like, this year was awesome. Like, just the other night when we got those pictures, he's sitting there with a 2-year-old 10 point, which I think has all the potential in the world. And then you look at him standing next to that 2-year-old 10 point, and you're like, damn.
Just dwarfs him.
Like, that's why I personally pass 2- and 3-year-old deer, is to be able to see that kind of thing. But there's a lot of people that, like, for instance, if this year, my dad, right, who's hunted and taught me everything I know about hunting. I think the biggest buck he's killed was with us in Kansas in the 130s, which was awesome, right? If a 140-inch 3-year-old came by and he's wanting to shoot it, dude. Like, everybody has expectations different. So just because I won't shoot 3-year-olds doesn't mean that I don't want my wife Emily to shoot 3-year-olds, or I don't want.
Doesn't mean we won't mess up and shoot a 3-year-old either.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. If I see a 165-inch 3-year-old, I'll probably kill him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just it's that kind of thing. But there is something of kind of, as every hunter probably has some accomplishment that they want to hold. Like, for me, and I know that we differ on this, like, I still love shooting does. Like, I get excited about shooting does.
We differ on that?
Well,
I love shooting does too.
You just like racking up numbers of does, I think.
That's right.
And
you're doing it more from a me perspective.
I'm
doing it from a management perspective.
Exactly, and that's a cool difference to be it. And like this year, obviously, I spent a ton of time in the woods with the kids. It was a banner year for me. Yes, we had an awesome, which we'll talk about at some point. We had an amazing North Dakota hunt. Right. In fact, it is the number one regret I think Jared and I have this year for Hunter is that we didn't videotape.
And probably one of the biggest inspirations. I think we did that hunt, and then afterwards we're like, dude, we should do a show.
And this was public land. This was do it yourself. This is like, we dug resources. We met some amazing contents from the Mule Deer Foundation.
It was from scratch.
Right?
We had just a friend of ours that works for Shield say, you guys should really consider this. Like, it's a cool hunt. I don't think it's that hard to get tags. And it was on the way home from that trip, we started doing some research to figure out about getting tags.
Which was not clear, by the way.
It was not clear. Jeremy and I put in for these North Dakota archery mule deer tags, fully expecting it to take 4 to 6 years to draw. Mm-hmm. As a lot of, some of the best states in the West, Midwest, they take a long time to draw. But anyways, it was 5 months after that, we got
We were sitting in the pandemic. Sitting at home one day.
An email saying you drew, you're good to go. And comes to find out, I actually called I remember I had you on a video conference.
Yeah, called the licensing guy.
I called the licensing department or whoever's down there, and they're like, oh yeah, no, it's more like 50-50 shot.
Yeah.
Sweet. So we threw the hunt together, and it was amazing.
We did a camper. I mean, and again, not being cocky, we got there.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the mule deer hunt.
All right. So we get there. We're in southwest North Dakota at that point, right? We're in the Badlands.
So we drove. We drove from southwestern PSX.
27 hours.
27 hours. Drove to Fargo.
Yep, picked up our camper.
Picked up a camper that we rented.
Mm-hmm.
I was like an A-frame travel
Which
trailer.
was smart, because listen, I mean, if you guys are ever going to do this thing, the last thing you want to do is haul that camper for 27 hours.
I think for 5 or 6 days, it was like $700.
Yep.
For the full thing, which we ended up not needing. I got $300 back on that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we leave Fargo. We drive to the southwest part of the state, which was another 5 hours or so past that. We're right along the Little Missouri River, right in the Badlands. We find this kind of no disrespect to it, but desolate little town that has a campground. Come to find out, it also we have our
There's nothing there.
hookups.
There's no gas station.
Yeah, no gas station, no restaurant, nothing.
Just a little campground and an ice cream parlor and a old car museum
and an amazing shower trailer.
Yeah,
that has a full heated bathroom and showers and stuff. I mean, literally a gem.
It was a mule deer hunter's paradise.
Yeah, and so, and this was a great learning lesson, right? We get there, we're excited, we're amped up, we set up, we go scout that evening, and
we got in the day before opening day, is that right?
Yeah, day before opening day. And keep in mind,
and we had driven 27 hours between the two of us.
Yeah, and keep in mind, if anybody is listening to this and thinking about North Dakota, so the season always opens on the Friday, first Friday in September. And it is at noon.
Yeah, which we were told at about 9:30 on opening day with bows in the back of the truck.
And this is because, where we come from, it's opening day. You've got your shooting hour table and you're out there. And here we thought, and again, there was not that many hunters in the area, and it was a local guy who told us this. And I'm thinking, all right, working over the out of
Jeremy, I was like, I would say the same thing.
Yeah, okay, man, yeah. And then I'm like looking it up on my phone. I'm like, oh, shit, it is noon today. So,
thank God for locals.
That first night, we went, and this is the disadvantage of whitetail hunting, right? We went east to ag right away. We went east to ag. We're like, there's public over there. There's a lot of private walk-in that is open to public. There's cornfields and stuff. And we saw deer. We saw more whitetail probably than we did mule deer. And we definitely saw more mule deer does than we saw anything of significance with bucks.
Just antelope too.
And it wasn't, we saw a lot of antelope. We saw one decent buck that night, which in retrospect, we probably overestimated the score.
Well, and in hindsight, that was about as close to the river as we got. And so in contrast, on the western side of the river, it was primarily
bluffs.
Mountainous. But bluffs, whatever you call it. What do they call it out there?
It's the Badlands.
The Badlands, yeah. Yeah, so a lot of desert, a lot of cliffs. It was just treacherous stuff that, as whitetail hunters, I don't think we expected the deer to be in.
We just weren't comfortable with it.
Yeah.
We thought that there would be more opportunity. And again, it's the whitetail hunter in us that's pulling us to food and ag. And, we had seen deer too coming in.
Is true.
We saw a ton of deer.
It is true. Well, and even once we got to the western side of the river, which is where you're going with the story, a majority of the deer that we did see, and we ended up getting into quite a few of them, were tied to these big ag fields, primarily alfalfa.
Alfalfa, yeah. And all those being private river bottoms, but a lot of public in the bluffs above them. So it was such a learning experience, because I think that if we go from that first opening day, right, in that morning, we're driving into the Badlands, and literally 50 yards off the road are bedded two big mature muleys.
Shooters.
I mean,
yep.
Right there.
What did we went in thinking it'd be awesome to shoot a 150, like a 150 mule deer.
Yes.
Which is bottom of the trophy realm of mule deer.
Sure.
So it's a good baseline for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if we sum that whole thing up, I mean, we saw multiple bucks over 150. Now the learning experience for us, once we got out there and you're in the thing, is it's hard to kill a 150-inch mule deer, right? They're there. A lot of them exist on private. It's big land that you're trying to get into and hunt these deer, and I think for us, I don't know, at some point, at least for me, if we fast forward a little bit here, we knew there was a good area that we had seen a bunch of big muleys hanging into, a bunch of muley bucks. We stalked in on, it was 90 degrees that day, the second day of the season when I killed mine. Mm-hmm. We stalk in, and again, a learning experience for us. We're looking for thick draws. We're looking for, even wooded clumps and things like that. And literally, these bucks are laying in the shadow of a single hump in the terrain,
ditch. Yeah.
In a ditch, and so you all of a sudden look and there's one small area of shadow in 500 acres and there's 2 bucks laying under it. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened with those 2 big ones.
I think what happened was like you thought that you had seen the whole draw. Like there was nothing left. It was just a small little cove.
I crawled the whole way
and
through. And
eventually you're like, well, I guess they had gotten up and left. And sure enough, they were at the very last little corner.
Under a single sage bush.
Yeah.
Single sage bush. So, we ended up getting on those bucks again. We switched. You pulled the stock that evening. Mm-hmm. We had seen where those bucks had run to. So we just...
That's right.
And it's funny because from a whitetail guy, I'm like, damn road hunters, right? But literally, if you're covering ground, you are driving up and down these back roads and just spotting the whole way. Like looking and looking and looking till you see deer.
And then you make a move.
And that's the only way you can cover ground. I mean, we cover thousands of acres a day.
Well, and it's cool to note that strategy is not at all what I expected. The weeks and months leading up to this hunt, I'd watched a lot of high country Colorado mule deer hunts, and there's a lot of good YouTube videos and stuff, and those are all based around guys sitting up and glassing for hours and hours, and I kind of expected to have to do that. I thought we would find a spot and just kind of sit, and I thought we would be into the same bachelor groups of bucks, mm-hmm. from day to day, and that kind of wasn't the case at all. We got there, and there was like deer everywhere. And it was a lot of deer. It was like, okay, we have to be mobile. We have to figure out what deer are moving where, and then from day to day, figure out what times to be at what fields or what bluffs to see them crossing a certain river, and then the idea is to watch them get as close to their bed as possible so that you can start to make a move. Yeah. And ultimately, I think we had some success doing that.
Well, I mean, keep in mind when we finally started to talk to some of the locals who were in camp with us, I don't know if my expectations changed dramatically, but they definitely changed because you're talking to guys who have hunted here for 15, 20 years, and they're out there trying to kill forkhorns. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, well, like we definitely have seen bigger bucks than that, but are our expectations just like we're never going to be able to make a stock on these deer? And so like I know I faced that conflict when I killed mine because we had snuck up to the edge of this draw. It was hot as hell. It was like noon, right?
And we were still hunting at that point, basically. Peeking over bluffs as we're going. Because if guys have never mule deer hunted, a lot of these, like what the local told us, every 1 in 100 that you peek over, there'll be a mule deer buck laying there.
Just laying in the shade, right, keeping as cool as possible. And we had stood there for a while. And I think it was 2 bucks stood up and ran. Yep. And it was like, son of a bitch.
Blew a couple out of there.
And I mean, we had been standing there talking, not like high voice, but just normal kind of talking for a while. And so I said I was going to creep up and kind of peek over. And like, I looked down and that damn buck was bedded 20 yards, but straight down, almost back behind me, the way that cliff kind of, curves out. And it was one of those things, as soon as I saw it, it's like, yeah, I want to kill this deer. Mm-hmm. And then, like, as you're studying it, and again, going back to our expectations, it's like, he's not 150.
And I couldn't see him.
I know, you're 20 yards behind me. Uh-huh. Again, when we should have been filming, right? And it's like, I keep looking at this deer, and like, so number one, he's in velvet, right? Full velvet, which I've never killed a deer in full velvet, so it's like, well, that's going to probably put him over the edge for me.
Not alone.
Yeah, it's like, is that a piece of velvet? Yeah, he's dead. Yeah. And then number two is he had the drop tine on the one side. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, never killed a velvet buck, never killed drop tine. Yeah, I don't care, I'm going to kill this deer.
And I do remember in hindsight, not to like throw you under the bus on this, you looked at me, and I was like, how big is it? You said, 140? I was like...
You're like, yeah. And I was like, drop tine. You're like, So, and I was fortunate. First of all, like, really impressed with, because, I mean, it was cool because you got to take your time. Like, I remember calming myself, standing up, taking the shot.
Totally unique experience for us.
We
had never done that before.
Yeah, from the ground, straight down. Ended up, I guess, pulling it a little bit, put it forward. But that deer, I mean... That shot messed him up. I mean, just bleeding everywhere, through his shoulder. I mean, crushed his shoulder blade.
The shoulder bone. You obliterated right through the main bone.
And I mean, that's something to say too, not to get on a tangent, but we're both shooting victory arrows now.
Yeah.
We're shooting.
Have been for a while.
Shooting weighted in the front as well.
Yeah.
A lot of things that we've learned just on a whitetail standpoint. I've had my issues with pass throughs and shoulder blades. I know you have as well. And this was a clear example. Given, it's 20 yards, but I mean, I'm talking just trashed his shoulder blade. Cut a massive hole in him, and that deer bled. That said, that son of a gun did not want to die. And that was if there was a downfall of that entire stock, was like he went down within 40 yards, he got up, went down again, and he just laid there and just wouldn't die. And because of the openness around it and the fact we were close to private, normally I would have went up and made another shot on him and put him out quick because I hate watching him like that. Yeah. But like you can't risk pushing them on private and then you're screwed.
There's no getting close to that deer in a big open country either.
So,
well, I think in hindsight too, you hit that deer a little far forward.
Yeah.
You cut off the front of his heart essentially.
Yeah.
So no lungs, just the front of the heart, and so it took him a little longer to expire, which I agree was tough to watch. But I think we did the right thing. I ended up backing out. You stayed for a while just to make sure he didn't move.
Just to keep an eye on him.
remembered in that moment that we didn't have our game bags, right?
Yeah, right.
And so fortunately.
Yeah, we had just been walking in. I mean, odds of us coming across the deer, we had no idea.
Fortunately, we were close enough to the truck that I was able to bail out. I took Jeremy's pack. I went back to the camper. I got everything that we needed to come back and process that animal. And we had it done within
an hour or two. It was 92 degrees, in that sunlight.
Yeah.
But yeah, we made quick work out of it, hiked him back out of there, got back to camp, processed it, and I think we went and cruised around that night looking again.
We definitely did, because that was the night. Did I stalk that buck that you hunted right at the very opener? Was that same night?
Yes. Yeah. No, we saw him, but we didn't make a stalk. You stalked him the first night, because that's why we switched back. I stalked, you stalked, I stalked and killed.
Because that's how we were doing it. We were alternating. Like Jeremy was stalking, then I was stalking, and we were just whatever deer was. I don't know. We just were figuring it out.
And then at some point, we stumbled across. I don't even remember how we did it. We found this big alfalfa field in the bottom, and we had seen. Don't get me wrong. We had seen other bucks. We'd made some stock on some other deer. We tried to stalk that one that was probably 150s that had constantly been there with the does and dropped into the ditch. But at some point, we found the alfalfa bottoms. And now, given first off, they were loaded with some giant whitetails.
Giants. And
I mean, that's what we would see, and there's giant whitetails. And then it was that morning that we all of a sudden laid eyes on that big group of bachelor muleys. And it's so funny because, us being whitetail guys, I don't think about it, but like those whitetails were very much in this section of the alfalfa field, and those muleys were completely separate from that.
Yeah.
In fact, the muleys were like intermingling with the cows, where from where we come from. I mean, if you got cows, whitetail hate cows.
Yeah.
Like they're not the same. So, and we watched those deer for, I don't know, hours.
For a while. So I think a big part of that too is like your optics, man, for these hunts.
Yeah.
My dad hooked me up with a sweet pair of binoculars that
stabilizers.
They have some kind of stabilization technology. I think it's Canon that makes them. Nikon makes them a pair like that too. But at those long ranges, especially like freehand in the truck, I mean, I think you had lost sight of the deer at that point, and you've got a nice pair of.
Yeah, I'm kicking Vortex.
What are you rocking? Some Vortex?
Yeah.
And I am
10
too.
by 50s.
I am too. I'm rocking like some. I don't even know what Burris. I have a pair of Burris.
Yeah, good glass.
Binos that I keep on my chest, but for that truck scouting for mule deer for that long range, that vibration reduction optic is just awesome.
Yeah.
Anyways, so we got on this bachelor group of mule deer, probably 5 or 6 of them. I could tell right away. I said, dude, I would shoot almost any one of those bucks.
They're all dead.
Yeah, they all look, you know. And so we're watching them, and there's a lot of private on the other side of the river that it seemed like they were heading towards. And we just kind of kept eyes on them, and we were probably there for half hour, 45 minutes at least from the time we saw them.
At
least, maybe more. But we were able to see, like at the very last second, a few of them, hop over into this piece of public.
Yeah, we lost them in the river.
We lost them in the river,
and then it's like we saw deer.
They could come out one of 2 ways or more. We didn't know. We're just like, just keep your eyes on this area. And eventually
It
they
was like 10 or 15 minutes that we had
Yeah.
not seen them. And
eventually they showed themselves, and we were able to pull up on Onyx and figure out that this piece was public, not easily accessible though.
I mean, you're talking like from where we could enter to like where these deer entered into the public on the far end was 3 miles as the crow flies.
Yeah.
You know, and it was like, but it was bluff country, and you knew it. You knew, and immediately as you see these deer, that those deer are bedded up in those bluffs, and every day they're coming down into that alfalfa.
Fortunately, we've been training. We've been looking forward to this thing all season.
Yeah.
There was no question. I said,
Yeah.
we're going,
Yeah.
obviously. So we kind of rallied. We had a somewhat of a rough idea of at least where we had seen these deer last, and we figured that they wouldn't make it too much further up into the bluff. So we retreated back to the campsite. I think we changed out all of our gear from like mornings scouting stuff to just more midday, mid-heat, like we're going to be putting some miles
We knew
on.
we geared up with a lot of agua, in which case we needed more.
Yeah, water, snacks, and everything we needed to process. And we started after them. So we went up the eastern road here where we had actually started the hunt because that's the only way to access that side of the river.
And fortunately, we looked and we were able to cut about, a half mile off because we found out that we were able to use that 2-track road.
Yep, 2 tracks are fair game.
As long as we closed the fence for the cattle, basically.
That's right. So we actually opened a gate, drove in on the 2-track, closed the gate.
Saved us a half mile
Saved
walking.
us. And on the way in didn't seem like that much, but on the way out, oh my gosh.
We would have been in trouble.
I don't know if I could have made it another step.
We would have been in trouble for sure, man.
Yeah.
And I think so. Then the cool thing is, like, we dive in, and I mean, when you get to that top of that canyon rim, you're looking down and you're like, wow, that is a lot of country between us and the river. I mean, you can't even see the river in the fields yet. And so we get down in there, and I mean, we found, and that was the other thing, like, again, and just because we're getting, sheds everywhere.
Everywhere.
Like, you're like, okay, nobody's been down here, right? Or they're just not picking them up.
We found like 5 or 6 sheds within the first few hundred yards.
Yeah. And I mean, tons of deer sign. In fact, we ended up spotting what was probably a 150-inch deer.
Yeah.
And
we got lucky on that. We were probably down in there at a mile, you think?
Yeah.
Probably a mile.
Yeah, we could still see the
vehicle. And I don't know why. I was looking at you, or I went to look back up the draw, and I just saw a velvet rack. Like, we think the thing was 500 yards away.
Easily. It's sitting in a little shaded part of the cliff line.
I just grabbed Jeremy, and I, like, pulled us down, and we were just below this thing, and then we would, like, peek back up, and I was like, that's definitely, like, a rack, right? Mm-hmm. So then we got up to this... the next little bluff that was between us, and we got our good optics out and got a better beat on him. It was a beast. I mean, it was a nice velvet buck, well into the 150s, I would say. Mm-hmm. And Jeremy had killed his buck the day before, and so we were going to make a plan for me to go.
And I was going to spot.
So we abandoned that spot and actually got closer and up higher. So you were probably like, I don't know, 300 yards from him that
Yeah,
point?
and up high.
And so in the state of North Dakota, you can actually communicate via like walkie-talkie. So I can hear Jeremy in my earpiece, kind of telling me where we need to go and making sure I'm not walking 100 yards past this deer type of deal. But I circled all the way back out the way that we had come in, got back pretty close to where the truck was at, and then started working back in down towards this deer. And at that point, Jeremy could see me, but let me know that the deer had gotten up
and walked.
And had walked, and he couldn't quite see where it went. Mm-hmm. And so I'm edging in, and I know that I'm probably within like 100 yards of where this deer would be.
Dude, this is a great point in, like, even though where I'm at and where you're walking and how I can see everything, these areas, and it's good to have another person with you when you hunt these, it is super deceiving.
Yeah.
Like, you're telling me where you're at, and I'm looking, and I don't see you anywhere.
I know.
And it's just because there's really another bluff and stuff in front of you, and it's like, how's that even possible?
Well, and think about, if you can't find your buddy who's waving his arms, how are you supposed to find a deer who's bedded, tucked under? But anyways, yeah, there's a lot of terrain out there. So as I'm working into where we had seen this deer last, I actually saw a younger buck walk around a little bluff away from me and kind of back towards Jeremy. And I had to assume that the bigger buck was probably right.
And I had seen the bigger buck. I ended up getting a beat on him, but he never stopped moving. Like, he kept moving through that ditch. At one point, you were on one side of the ditch, he was on the other, and you were coming towards him. Yeah. And I think that's when you saw that little buck come towards me again and come around that little knob there.
Yeah, and so once they made it around that knob, I used that to close the distance. I was rocking some Keens. They're just like the same boots that I trained in and stuff. And we weren't wearing any camo.
No.
I was wearing a pair of like paperweight type pants, like really thin.
Again, hot as hell
and
too.
durable. I had like a t-shirt on in my back. So basically I shed my Keens. I was rocking a pair of just heavy socks to keep my feet from getting it all splintered up. And I ran at that bluff and then just really started working around it really slowly. And as I'm getting around it, you had let me know that little buck boogered.
He boogered.
You're like, yeah,
he came under me. And at first I'm like, man, was that really the deer?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, there's no way. Like, he was smaller. But yeah, he ran right underneath me at 60 yards.
So we knew that deer was gone. He had boogered, and we were still looking for the big one.
Yeah.
He had to be right in the area. And I'm just edging forward ever so slightly. I mean, there's a little coulee right in front of me that's, in my opinion, the only place he could have gone.
Yeah, and that's where I thought he was. I'm like, dude, he did not come out the other
And you're
end.
telling me he's got to be right there. He's got to be right there. And so I just keep edging forward. And, like, I was impressing myself. I was like, dude, with these socks, like, I'm literally dead
I was
silent.
stressed out, dude, because I'm looking at where you're at, and I'm like, there is nowhere this deer could go. Like, that's what I kept saying. Like, dude, he is there.
Yeah. It's like one of those you're right on top of him type of a thing. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm edging forward. I'm pretty confident that I can see every little piece of this coulee that's in front of me. And I take one final step to where I can literally see the very bottom of it. And sure enough, there he is.
He's bedded in that. Like,
He was bedded at the very bottom of it, like in a gopher hole, like 10 yards from me, maybe. And, saw his antlers. I knew he had seen me. I came to full draw. I already had an arrow knocked. And, he took
was
out of
already
there
up.
like a bat out of hell. I tried to stop him.
Yeah.
Again, we're learning from YouTube videos and stuff. I thought he might stop and I would get a shot, but it just never happened.
Yeah.
And then I was
Cut same way in front of me, same as that little buck.
back to the eyes on the sky because I lost sight of him.
Yep.
Let my
And
arrow
I
down.
watched them the whole way. And I mean, this deer ran 400 yards again, went to a ditch that went up on a rock, and there was like a little bit of a shelf, and he freaking bedded right under that shelf. I mean, I was amazed watching this deer. I'm like, dude, he's down again. Like, he's right here.
The way you said it to me was, you're like, dude, this deer just mule deered up that up that
I mean,
cliff.
he just went straight up in and buried himself, and I could see him like legs kicked out. Like, I mean, he was spent because I mean it was hot, and he had already moved several times.
Yep.
And so I was like, dude, I hate to do this to you, but you're gonna have to hike.
I was already on my way, dude. I was like, this is what I trained for all summer. Let's go.
It was a hill, and that's where I really wish I could have filmed it because I mean it's up, and I told you, I said you're gonna have to go up over top of him, down, and then back across. It's the only way you could get to him to be able to get an angle of a shot.
Yep.
And that probably took an hour and a half maybe between that. And somewhere in that whole passage, and again, I'm keeping eyes on the area as much as possible without, a little bit of communication to you and kind of looking and seeing where you're at. And like somehow you get there, and again, same thing. I'm like, dude, he is right there. Like, he's right underneath you. It's going to be 20 yards. And you're like, he's not there. Like, and the deer disappeared.
Vanished.
And then that's where you really get in, because what I'm looking at is a little cliff that he bedded under and just like a flat bald rock, right? When you get there, it's a drainage with a drainage behind that flat rock that goes up over the hill that if that deer's in that ditch, you're never going to see him.
It's amazing.
And that's what he did.
It was
He
amazing.
snuck right out through there, and it was like, and at that point it's like, man, and
I would have definitely killed that deer. And we found out, I'm pretty sure the only reason he got up and moved was that sun caught up with
Yep.
Where he was.
I mean,
bedded.
there were giant beds right there where he was kicked in.
He may have been in the shade for the first 20 minutes, but eventually that sun got on him and he got up and out.
Yeah, and that's a critical thing because, I mean, time is of the essence because at this point...
That's right.
I won't say we wasted, but, I mean, we've spent 3+ hours chasing this deer, and we still have 2 miles to the river to get there before dark, and these bucks getting up to go to the alfalfa.
Yeah, I remember after all of this, we even questioned, like...
Going down.
Did we keep going? Or...
Yeah.
I do like.
We said yeah.
I do like what we did though, like because we were kind of defeated after that second attempt. I was like, man, he slipped us again. Mm-hmm. So I had you come over from your vantage point, and I was just sitting in that buck's bed, waiting for you to get there, just like thinking about what had just transpired and what we could have done differently, I guess, and we learned something there for sure.
Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, that the way that those deer, and again, it makes sense, right? Like, the deer doesn't want to be in the sun. He doesn't want to be running. he's going to get to a new point. And they knew, like, that deer left that bed because he knew his other bed was up there. And I guarantee he probably has 3 or 4 of them like that he just consistently moves around based on where the sun is and time of day and stuff like that.
Yeah, and because we lost sight of him, I mean, we didn't really know where to start looking. So
yeah, we just
instead
bailed.
of chasing that deer, we decided to go back after the deer we'd seen that morning. And, thus continues the rest of the adventure. We start heading west again, back down towards the river.
Yep.
And so the way that we did that
we stayed
was...
up high.
What time do you think it was at that point?
Oh, it was probably after. It was probably 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock. Sunset's at like 7:30.
7:30. Yep.
So we had,
We had
enough time.
But keep in mind, I mean, it was a big hike in and then a big hike back out.
We had enough time that we decided to keep working west.
Yep.
And so what we were doing is just kind of getting to the tops of some of these high points, trying to glass beneath us as good as we could. And then once we decided that, there was nothing there, we would get down and get to the next one. And we kind of go back and forth, and we're trying to work the wind as well as, the shade and how all that was looking. And
Yep.
We did eventually get down to where these deer were at, and I think we bumped a few does along the way.
Yeah, we didn't see a ton. I mean, we saw some beautiful country. I mean, places that no doubt there were bucks in, right? But, like, just not at that time. And we slipped down, and then when we kind of finally got into our landmarks, like, we knew what we were looking for. In fact, I could still picture the rock that we were basically saying, yeah, there's a big wall here. It's shaded. Those deer are all bedded behind this wall. And so I think...
And we expected them to all be together. Because they all come across the river together. We thought they would be all in one group.
And so then, as we made our approach to that, keeping our wind in mind and trying to ease towards the river, we run into this buck.
Oh, dude, and we were getting into it, too. Like, you could tell, I was like, oh, this bed's pretty fresh. There was scat over here. We'd see rubs, and it was like, oh, this is like...
It was shaded. It was cooler.
We're
in
in the bedroom right here.
Yeah, and I mean...
And we were close. We were getting really close to the river, whereas, like, that's where we saw them come in at. They're between here and there.
And we thought we were screwed because we look up and there's this buck dead across from us, looking right at us, with a bird on his back, picking the velvet off his antlers, and it's like, shit,
Yeah.
And I mean, the strange thing about all of that is, like, we had seen a really good buck before that, working through that bottom. Just got up from his bed and worked off into another spot, but like. And there very well could have been. I mean, you see all the exit routes that were there, but, like, we didn't see any other deer with him. Like, he was by himself, which ended up working out to our advantage.
Yeah. That was the riskiest part about the whole deal, was eventually I made a run at that deer, not fully knowing that there wasn't 4 more other bucks up further in this draw that we're all going to blow out.
That we couldn't see, yeah. And so I'm sitting there, and I belly crawled to this spot where I had a perfect visual.
You just tell us first, because I want your perspective on it.
So, like, we had watched this deer, and I still have been watching him. I was on my belly. Jared had, like, kind of gone up and around to try to make an approach on this deer. And so I'm looking...
And you were thinking I was going to just stay on the ridge.
Stay on the ridge, up on the high.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, like, I'm watching this deer. I see how this trail comes. I see where it goes, and I see where they come up to the alfalfa field. Well, this deer drops into this ditch, at which point I'm looking back for you, because I'm like... He's going to come in front of me at 40 yards. Like, you shoot him right here at 40 yards. He's going to funnel right into this ditch. And I'm looking, and I'm like, man, like, I'm whistling. There's nobody there. I don't know what to do. Next thing I know, I look, and there's you sliding down the hill, up the hill. And at this point, you're 15 yards above this deer. And I'm like, where did he come from? And I'm like, waiting and looking. And, like, at that point, I still don't know, again, because there's so many ways these deer can go. Like, is he there? And when you had gone up and you drawn, and I think you let down even once, and then you drew and you stood up and released, and the deer comes blowing out, I'm like, game over.
I think I just turned around and was like,
it was like game over.
Done.
And here it is, it's like, and again, if you go back to what we've thought of doing, I don't think we would have ever crossed our mind to be that aggressive, right? I mean, look how we just approached that deer an hour before.
Instinct, man.
Yeah, I mean,
instinct.
The fact that you were able to get down and up and above him, I mean, it was perfect how it worked out.
Yeah.
You couldn't have planned it any better. And I mean, a stud deer, went 40 yards, fell over.
Yeah.
There we are, like in the shadows of the Badland canyons with the Little Missouri River behind us, cutting this deer up, and Like it literally,
Dude, just in our glory. In a year of like just turmoil, and like 2020 was hard on that was probably the most fun I had all year.
And I mean, it's crazy, and we joke about it all the time, whether it's there or whether it's, going to Kansas or whatever. We're always like, yeah, we're coming back with, 2 racks in the back, no doubt. In 2 days, we came back with 2 racks in the back. The next morning, it was miserable as hell, 30 degrees and rain. We slept in, we ate a giant breakfast, and then we're like,
cook the rest of the eggs, shower beers.
So we're like, what do we do? Like, go home? And it's like, yeah, let's go home.
Take our time, pack up, and head home.
Happy wives, happy lives type of thing. And so, I mean, you couldn't plan it, but I mean, the ultimate thing is, so keep in mind, guys, this is all on public land, right? We had never been there before. It's instinct for so much of it. And given, there were a ton of deer, and again, just like we talked about Kansas this year, it may not be like that. We have to get drawn first.
Well, dude, and sometimes it's probably to our advantage that we don't know what we're doing. Like, a good mule deer hunter would have probably called me an idiot for running at that deer the way that I did.
Yeah, probably.
But it worked out.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that... from what we over prepared for that hunt, which definitely helped in terms of physical condition. Now, coming out of that bottom with all of the meat and the racks and stuff, and no agua and hot and like just sweaty and dirty. By the time we got back to that truck, I mean, we were licked.
It's tough.
But like it was also just pure adrenaline.
I had to stop a few times. You remember, I sat down and I was like, I had been running a lot. I had been walking with a weighted pack. Like, in hindsight, there's some things that I would change about my training to like get more weight in my bag, more elevation type of a deal. But
yeah. I mean, overall, like, what a trip! Like, instantaneously on the way home, and again, it may not ever work out that way again. But we're like, yeah, dude, like, this is an automatic. Like, we put in every year. We try to come back. It was fun. We hope to get more people out there with us this year. But just that to me is kind of what our passion is all about. Like, raw to that experience, raw to that land, raw of how to hunt those animals, and just, and in particular with bows, right? And we're not carrying out Boone and Crockett bucks out of there, but like we both were successful. There were memorable stalks, coolest things that we've ever done in a long time. In a year, like you said, of so much turmoil and just stress, like, we found something that was awesome, and can't wait to get out and do it again.
For sure. And I wouldn't attempt it without, I guess you at my, like, no homo on the podcast here, but like everybody out there, if you're going to attempt something like this, we're fortunate enough to have like our work lives align, and I would say like the exact same amount of passion. Like, transparently, I didn't get into deer hunting to make friends. Like, I could care less if that happened or not. I was in it to kill big deer because my uncle, put that passion into me, and it's just something that I live for. And having found you as a friend, and ultimately now being able to do this on a hunt together, I think like that camaraderie that you can have with 1 or 2 people or a group, whoever you're doing it with, like that ultimately, even though it's not what I was looking for out of that hunt, is like I think why we were so successful at it and why we enjoyed it so much.
I think so, man. Well, I mean, I don't think we can end a first podcast any better. I mean, it was an awesome trip. These are the kind of things that I really want to share with people because, I'd love to hear other people's experiences and how they're mule deer hunting. We've talked about going to some other places, and I'm sure it'll be on the docket. North Dakota is one that I definitely will come back to just because of, the places that we have and the experience that we had and the stay that we had. But I think that, with that, it's a great way to kick off your hunting season year. I hope we do it again in 2021, but like, ultimately whitetails are the deal. Right? And so, I think that probably where we'll go on maybe the next podcast is talk about more specifically some of our early season. We come back from a trip like that on an ultimate high, right? And all the stuff that we've planned for the year. And now you and I are getting good bucks on camera, on our home farms, and then it's just like it just goes so fast to where it's like, we're at an ultimate high of this new mule deer hunt, and like now we're coming back to
pretty quick.
We're coming back to our home turf
to the real world,
and it's just like what happened, and I think it's important I know other people experience that too, so it's important for us all to share that kind of conversation of like, listen, it doesn't mean that our season went to shit, right? But the highs and lows of hunting are probably why we do it, but boy, they're hard to handle sometimes too.
Yeah. That's something that I'm still working on too, is trying to figure out how to cope with a several month long season, because like I'm a go hard, go fast type of a guy.
Mm-hmm.
And when a few things start to kind of fall out of whack with what the plan was, sometimes it kind of falls apart. You need to figure out how to regroup and, get back in there for a late season hunt or whatever it is to finish on a strong note at the end of the year. But that's just part of my journey.
Yeah. Well, one of the things too, guys, that we want to mention, just like anything, it's got to have financial responsibility. Our presenting sponsor for the Hunter podcast is Deer Grow. If anybody plants food plots for deer, I'm sure it's a lot of you guys out there. Deer Grow is just an unbelievable product to make your plot investment really benefit. A lot of things depend on weather, but if that foundational base, your pH is off, you don't have the calcium you need in the soil, your fertilizer is bound up in the soil, what Deer Grow does as an amendment to the soil to free up those nutrients for your food plots is unbelievable. Check them out at deergrow.com. And we'll have plenty of conversations around food plots and around how Deer Grow and these kind of products can benefit you, as we move forward in the Hunter podcast, particularly as we get into what we're going to start planning here in the next, 3 or 4 months. So
it's a big part of us being able to do what we do. We mentioned a few of them on the podcast here today, specifically Victory Arrows was a big part of us pulling that mule deer hunt off.
Huge.
And stealth cam cellular trail cameras is a big one for us to be able to run.
I don't even know how many podcasts we're going to have around trail cameras and stealth cam. I'll be the first to say that, this was a season where I lived and died by trail camera footage.
As non-resident hunters, that's like our number one tool.
And unfortunately, I died more than I lived, and that's something I'd love to hear from people is like, what's your take on that? Like, I probably won't change my method this year, but, it's a huge advantage to have those types of things, but it's also could be, the number one curse to not killing a deer when you're not in the woods.
For sure.
So.
I think maybe as a send-off, just because this is our first podcast, this is a new project for us, it's worth mentioning some of our platforms where people can start to find us. We've got an Instagram and a Facebook. I believe both are at We Are Hunter, HUNTR, just omit the E.
Yep.
We've got a YouTube channel coming pretty soon.
Yep, we've got a bunch of content. You can see a lot of that on our social media platforms right now, but YouTube will be coming soon. We've got a new website that'll be coming. Also, wearehunter.com. Easy to find us there. We've got some cool apparel and logo. Jared and I are wearing the hats right now.
Yeah, if you like some of these hats, you can buy them on the site here. Probably within the next couple of weeks, we'll have them available.
Probably have them on some of our partner sites like Deer and Deer Hunting as well. But yeah, a lot of big stuff to come from Hunter. And really, I think the thing that we talked about before this podcast even started is, I'm excited to figure out how to get the listeners and the viewers involved with Hunter. Like, there's a lot of cool experiences and stories. I think, we've got Ian here that's going to be helping us out with the podcast and a lot of our production stuff too. As we get this thing going, I'd love to see on a Facebook or on an Instagram, comments, questions, things like that, personal stories that Ian can chime in and kind of feed some discussion from us. I mean, Hunter is a community, right? I mean, that's really what we are at the end of the day. Whether you want to kill 150s or you just want to kill a buck or you just want to get into hunting. I mean, this pandemic has put so many new people into that spot. I think that we're here to kind of bring that community together. There's enough divisiveness across this country as is. We've always had a problem with, hunters hating on hunters, and that is not what we are about. Our message here is to bring everybody together, new hunters to old hunters, trophy hunters to meat hunters, and bring everybody together as a community because, it's the stories at the end of the day that drive us. So
yeah. And if we can get figure out some new places to hunt in the meantime or learn some cool stuff, we're certainly looking to do that.
Well, appreciate it, guys. Thanks for listening to the first ever Hunter podcast. We hope to have you back next time, and we'll get into a little bit of whitetail deer hunting, I believe.
Cheers.
Take me